Fumi,
Hi.
how are you?
Sure. So, hi everyone. I'm Akan. I'm founder at Evolve Credit. Evolve Credit is an online marketplace for loans and financial products in Nigeria and then in Africa. So essentially, what we do is we connect people who are looking for financing to cover their personal needs or their business needs with institutions and individuals who are able to provide that financing. That's what we do.
Nice. Nice. Okay. So how long have you been in business? Like how long did you start above credit?
Sure. So we soft piloted the first version of our online marketplace in May last year, so May 2020. Um,
No, okay.
and since then, and then we launched in May 2020, and then spent a significant the rest of that year building out the technology to facilitate the matching of borrowers
Mm,
and lenders, and are now went fully operational in January 2021. So we're still very early stage, but really
yeah.
excited.
Okay. That's really cool. I mean, Ingressive Capital is invested in Evolve Credit, so we're super excited about your growth and the journey so far. I guess we'll begin. So hi everyone. You're welcome to Ingressive for Goods webinar, and we're going to be speaking about open source. And I'm Fumi Ali. I'm the senior analyst at Ingressive Capital. And we have Akan. Akan introduced himself already, and we are expecting Samson. So once he comes on, I'll definitely do an intro for him. Well, as Akan said, he's the CEO of Evolve Credit. Akan is very passionate about spirituality, art, tech, and entrepreneurship. He graduated from University of Rochester in Rochester, New York, and with a degree in economics. So that's the. Did you always think, Akan, that you're going to move from economics to tech?
So I had in mind that I wanted to be an entrepreneur,
Mm-hmm.
and, and that I wanted to work I wanted to work where the people who I felt were working on cutting edge solutions were working. And so
Mm,
if at the time that I was in school, finance and consulting and finance analysis seemed to be what was really hot, at least in the
mm-hmm.
circles that I was moving in. So I thought that was where I would end up. And
Yeah.
then when I actually finished and came back to the continent, to Africa, first to South Africa and then back to Lagos, um, it became very clear to me that where the real innovation was happening, and where there were real significant opportunities to transform
Yeah.
people's lives on the day-to-day level was in tech.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
so I threw myself into it and educated myself. I'm still learning,
Yeah.
uh, but it's been a journey so far.
Nice. So Akan has worked in the past worked with United Bank of Africa, Africa Leadership Academy, and completed some short finance projects in Fortune 500 companies like PNG, G, and ExxonMobil. And we're so excited to have you here, Akan. So while we wait for something, we're just going to begin. So we're talking about open source today, but can you let us know what open source actually is?
Sure. So I think Samson is the core subject matter expert here.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Essentially, I will give the layman's breakdown for everyone as I understand.
Mm-hmm.
So open source software is software that is completely free to use.
Mm-hmm.
So it's released out to the public. You can download it, you can use it, you can modify it, you can reproduce it. Um, you can make whatever changes. You can build on top of it, right? You can basically use the software however you want. So an example of um, open source software would be like the LibreOffice suite. So
Mm-hmm.
if you've ever bought a new computer and you didn't have
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft Word and you're trying to
Yeah.
find a processor that was free, Libre Suite, Open Office, those are
Mm-hmm.
examples of open source software. And then to give you an example of what's not open source, like Microsoft Office is not open source because you have to pay to use that software.
Okay.
And if
Yeah.
you reproduce it, they will sue you. So that's what open source software is. I don't know if you want me to talk about um, like why I think it's helpful and why
Yeah,
I'm
I
pro
think.
open source.
Yeah,
I
I
don't want
think. I
to get
think
ahead
you
of
should.
myself.
No, I think you should speak about why you think it's helpful and it's useful. I think you should.
Sure. So essentially, if you think about how innovation happens, innovation happens when many different people who have different backgrounds and who've worked on different things are able to collaborate together intensely and rapidly to produce new things. Right
Yeah.
now, anything that creates a barrier for that collaboration to happen hinders the innovation and slows it down. Right? So if I build this amazing software, I'm one person or my team, we're one team, we can build it. But if we say no one else is allowed, that you can't even see this software unless you pay
Bro,
for it.
shut the fuck up, man.
Okay.
um,
Okay. All right.
I think everyone needs to mute, make sure that you're muted. But it's if you can't even reproduce the software,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Shut up, nigger.
I think
Okay. All right.
someone needs to
Uh,
get muted.
yeah. Okay. So just please continue. Let me get that sorted.
Sure. But essentially, it's that the software when you can reproduce it, it allows different people to work on it better and easier, and then they can reproduce it, right? So if you think of like how the first set of internet browsers came about, right? Chrome, Mozilla, Firefox, those are open source projects that different people built on, and then we have like the legacy browsers that we have today.
Mm,
Yeah. So
okay.
essentially, open source allows collaboration to happen much faster, much quicker.
Did you ever, like when building Evolve Credit, did you say take a part of open source software and put it into your proprietary code or software and use that for a bit when you're building your MVP? Or, I mean, you think open source should just stay on open source and you shouldn't put it into your business?
Well, so to give everyone more context, so my co-founder Daniel Oshineya, he's not on, but he handles the technical stack, and he's CTO at Evolve Credit. He handles our technical work. But from my understanding, how we benefited from the open source movement is, of course, online. Anyone who's a developer would know that you have these libraries online, these
Mm-hmm.
libraries of code, where different developers from around the world, they might have written um, just hypothetically like a banking app or something like that, and they put all the code online, and you're able to take that very quickly off the library and reproduce some of it or part of it, and build on it for your own purposes. And so I know that when we first started working on our web app,
Yeah.
um, for our online market, for first of all for the lending product we built, and then later on for our online marketplace, we did look at some of those libraries for inspiration. And it's
Mm,
I can't confirm, but it's possible that we might have even incorporated some of them into the final product.
interesting. Oh, interesting. Okay. So I know you said you're not the core person to speak about open source, but I'd still ask a few more questions. I mean, some people are asking how they can make money, how they can make money from open source. Like, how do they make money if anybody sells their code, or if they can even sell the open source program or open source code that they write?
Sure. So how I know it's been done
Mm-hmm.
is if you push out open source code and it gets really popular,
Yeah.
then that opens up,
Mm-hmm.
as long as you're getting credit for it, that opens up opportunities for you to then work with teams that may be interested in paying you for your talent. Um, it so that's one route. You can kind of, it's almost like when you ship an app and you have a freemium version, and then to get more of it, you then have to pay. So people can use part of your work for
Mhm.
free, and then to get more of your work, they have to pay for it. That's one route. Um, Another
Mm.
route is that I've seen done is um, so when you ship the open source version, instead of looking to piggyback off the traction that gets to get opportunities for yourself to work, you can just say that okay, there is a proprietary version that has some additional features or something like that, and then there's a token fee that people have to pay to get access um, to
Mm.
get to that. But it looks like Samson uh,
Yeah.
is on now.
Hi.
I'm sorry, I kind of got stuck on track and it's raining. So I just
Okay.
yeah.
Can you put on your video or not? On the board of directors with Sugar Labs, and Sugar Labs is a company or an organization which helps children learn about tech and contribute as well to open source. And so he's on the board of directors of Sugar Labs, and he's and sustaining open source collective as a board member. He also co-founded Open Source Community Africa, a movement that promotes and educates everything about open source within Africa. And he's currently doing open source with OVO as a program manager. So welcome, Samson. We're glad and happy to have you here.
Welcome. Sorry, I'm not able to. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, can you hear me? Can you see me now? I don't know. This is good. Yeah. Sorry, I'm in the car.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, good. Yeah. So thanks for the
No worries.
introduction.
Okay.
I'm very excited to be here today. Yeah.
Yeah, we're excited to have you as well. So we already started a bit with Akan, and Akan answered some questions about open source and how you can monetize open source.
Mhm.
So I guess my first question to you is like, how can you monetize open source? So people are asking, can they sell the open source code even if they didn't write it? And like how they can use like monetize open source.
Yeah. So I would say before I answer that question in a more generic term, I would try to personalize it and use some persons that I know in Nigeria that have actually been in that situation before. So I don't know if many people in here know about Chakra UI. So Chakra UI is designed by Shego, and Shego is a very huge person in the community, and he realized a problem, and obviously he built a design system called Chakra UI. But then Chakra UI is open source, so that means that you don't need to pay for, in order for you to get to use the project. But one of the cool thing about open source is that you can be able to build I would say, a paid version of your free project. So what that means is, so some companies and individuals have previously built something for free, but then they add an extra feature that might be beneficial to an individual or a company, and they made that part paid.
Mm.
So there's
Mm-hmm.
technically like a community version of that particular code, and also an enterprise version of the more advanced code. So that means like you still keep that sole purpose of making sure your project is open source, but also just because of money is important to pay for server,
Yeah.
pay for people that kind of work on it day to day. So that means that there has to be some kind of an upstream, right? And that's one cool thing about like what I do with Open Collective, because Open Collective have this system of network where they encourage projects to register, and then companies that sort of use that project for free might donate money for sustainability. I've previously done that with the Open Source Community Africa,
Okay.
that I co-founded in Nigeria, and we raised money to run the project, and also the concluded, I would say, like a year ago, where we did the open source festival, and everything was from our sponsors. And so there's
Mm-hmm.
numerous of ways that you can monetize community project and also software project.
Okay, great. So I know you, in when you were answering the question, you spoke about community. So, I mean, what is an open source software community? Like, how does it work? How do people, can you mention a few and how do people get involved?
Firstly, the community side of open source is basically the user and see. So every open source community is always it's always they're always like there's a community for a reason, right? Just like how there's community, right? So let's say let's say Tracker UI, for example, UI, and the goal of the community is to make sure that people get to share knowledge on like best practices on how to use Chakra, and also like system in place that could enable people to get to contribute to Chakra UIs, and also a community of contributors staying in one particular place to form a community. But then there's the community side of things that are just primarily focused on education, which in this case, Oscar is technically part of that criteria. So the open source community Africa, is designed in a way that we focus on education. So education in the form of like understanding what open source is in general, and then build a community of learners and also a community of mentors. So people like myself would come to Oscar to mentor
Yeah.
people that are pretty new in the community, and then people new to the community will come to me to ask questions. So that's how Oscar is designed. I can also imagine the same framework with the GDG, the same framework with Follow, She Code Africa. So there's just a bunch of communities that stand for education or for projects. So yeah.
Okay, great. So Akan, so there's a question about careers in open source and what skill you need to build a career in open source and monetize that sector. I'll call it the sector, part of tech.
Sure. I think naturally, the first career path that comes to mind are the technical ones. So,
Sorry, I can't hear you.
the- software development, software engineering, I would say, come to mind primarily. Full disclosure. Again, like I said, so I personally don't code yet. So,
Okay.
Samson, I'm sure you can flesh out when I say software engineering, software development, you can flesh out what the different niches in that are. But essentially, I would say that the same opportunities that exist in broader tech are exactly the same opportunities that exist in the open source community.
Mm-hmm.
Because open source is a movement and a concept within the tech community. It is not a separate community or a separate industry. So the same way you
Yeah.
have front-end devs, back-end devs, data scientists, ML machine learning experts, and all of that, you have them in the open source community too. So
Mm-hmm.
I'd say, if you're interested in if you're interested in open source and you want your career to be aligned with that, what you need to do is start with the basics. So start out coding, general computer science, broad education, and then as you go along you can specialize on one branch or the other. I also want to say that like in the broader tech community, there's an entire apparatus and an engine around the open source movement that is not technical at all, right? So there's sales people who are needed, there are marketing people who are needed, there's the strategy and the selling of open source, because if you produce open source software and then you add a feature that you then want to monetize for enterprise, that's
Yeah.
sales, right? And so it's possible for you to be like me in my startup where you're not a hardcore technical person. You understand the tech and how it works, but really the reason you're
Yeah.
there on the team is to sell, and to pitch and to form alliances and communicate with people. So Sam, I think it might be
Right.
useful for you to maybe just talk
Yeah.
about some of the different branches.
Yeah.
I think that's actually a very great explanation. Like you just explained the main thing, because people think that open source is another universe or something that they need to, start onboarding again. But the truth is, open source has always been there from, when tech was invented, because literally all, one of the things that I always tell my friends is, you use open source, but you don't just realize it, right? Because at the end of the
Yeah.
day, there's a whole lot of things that you get to use, like the Apple came out from, some bunch of trees, like, the Mac operating system came from some version of open source. There's a whole lot of things. The internet is being run in open source, like your Safari, which is, it's funny because the Macintosh operating system is closed source, but Safari and some bunch of tools that Apple rely on, obviously run by open source, including Google. Like almost, I would say all the technology that Google uses, including the Google Search. Google Search is written in a open source programming language called Python, right? So it's something that like people don't get to understand, that it's something that is always under the radar. So when it comes to the career part, yes, there's two type of way you should be looking at it. There's the I really
Yeah.
want to work on open source code or open source project,
Mm-hmm.
or I want to work for a company to do something, right? So there's the part where you utilize the community side of open source. So people often get confused that, when you're contributing to an open source project, right, and you're somebody that is still new to tech, that is a great way for you to work on things that you can
Yeah.
show to your future, any company that intends to hire you, without even having the issue of
Yeah.
like having your work being guided by an NDA. Like let's say you're working on a
Mm-hmm.
project and the next one say, hey, we want you to sign an NDA. Please don't disclose this. Don't, in the future.
Yeah.
But in open source, you don't have that. It's completely transparent. So that's where the community side of it comes, right? That community side enable you to like get to like learn, and also get to like improve your skill and get mentors. So particularly like my tech career as a whole, ranging from doing stuff at MIT to like doing stuff with like oil servicing company like Schlumberger, was basically around open source. And I have moved from code to research to community management to technical writing to like a bunch of things, including like serving as a programs manager right now, working
Yeah.
full time on open source. So open source kind of give you that flexibility for you to like kind of explore what you're passionate about. I got
Mm-hmm.
into tech as a software engineer. Like I was writing code, doing some bunch of things, when I was much younger. And eventually I realized that, oh, I love, interacting with people. So that kind of made me shy away from code. And I started focusing on, things like management and
Yeah.
making
Okay.
sure things work. Right. So you can still get your typical software engineering role, front end designing role, or you can work on, even there's another concept that is not very popular in this side of the world, but in the Western world, you see things like companies having open source program office. So this is a dedicated unit in a company that
Mm-hmm.
works on everything open source. And it's
Yeah.
harder to get hired. You need to be like an expert engineer in the other universe in
Really.
order to get selected into this company. Yeah, like at Google, the people working on OSPO, that's the open source program office. They are really, in order for you to be like a software engineer in that team, you need to have like minimum like 7 to 8 years of experience, because that is a unit that is very important to Google. So they want to make sure that they
Yeah.
have the best of the best. And in order for you to have that growth, you definitely need to have like experience of like what it means to be, doing things around open source and maintaining open source. So yeah, it's not that complicated, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah. So definitely open source has like different licensing, and there are some terms being used. So Samson, can you explain what it means to be what it is, what copyleft means, and also a permissive license? And then can you explain the difference, because it seems so similar?
Okay, so I am the worst person to ask this question.
Really?
So like
Okay.
I'm the worst person because I think I to my honest, right now my focus in open source right now technically does not care about in fact that's one of the things that I think is a flawed for open source, because the way open source
Yeah.
was previously defined, or the way open source is technically being run around, is the fact that it was most likely defined by engineers, people writing code. So you need to start thinking about like things like MIT license,
Mm-hmm.
Creative Commons is a way, like MIT license, BDS, JPL, and all these licenses. If you're on GitHub, there's a way for you to explain. But again, I'm not the expert. I feel like I may not want to comment on this topic because I
Yeah.
may have I'm not like an expert in that term, but again, that's where companies hire lawyers to make sure that they, these are kind of people doing some lawyer-ish job in tech. Those are like their priorities to make sure that companies knows which type of license to use on your project. So,
Mm-hmm.
so the basic point of having a license is to protect the creator or to kind of
Yeah.
attract the type of people you need. So in this case, the project that I'm working on, which is Trigger Labs, all our code is easy for you to just go on GitHub and take away and then remix it. And we will not come for you and say, hey, this is our project, right? We design it for somebody to take advantage of it. And I think at some point, even Elon Musk talked about how the design, all the design of Tesla are actually open source. So you can actually take,
Okay.
yeah, you can actually take the design and then you can go do your own version of Tesla and it's okay. So, but when it comes to like how permissive a license can be, trust me, you want to do a lot of digging. But technically, most of the time,
Yeah.
there are websites that kind of um, um, makes those processes easy for you to know. Okay,
Yeah.
let's say MIT, right? You always have to credit the creator. I know that's one thing that MIT has because students over at MIT uses that for projects. So when let's say Samson create a project and you eventually want to do your own version of it, you always need to make sure that you credit me and keep that. I don't think you can change that MIT license. It's always going to be in that folder, but you can
Yeah.
always maybe add another license to it, going forward. Yeah, but the licensing thing is a bit complicated. And sorry, I can't really comment on
Yeah.
that one. Yeah.
Okay, so Akan, do you want to comment on this? Or did you hear the question? I know you left for a few seconds.
Yeah, it was a question about licensing, right?
Yeah. About copyleft and permissive license and the difference between both of them.
Yeah, I'm not. No, I think the best approach for that particular question would be everyone who's on this webinar. Afterwards, we can just send
Okay.
a quick brief
Yeah,
on that.
send stuff.
Yeah.
Send stuff. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I know Akan, we spoke about a bit of open source code and say first stages of Evolve Credit. So someone in the community wanted to know that, does open source mean that everybody and anyone can use the person's name or logo? So the project name and project logo, does it mean that everybody can use, if you say create your product on open source using the open source code, does it mean that everybody and anybody can take your name and your logo and use it and we're all going to be all right?
All right. So
okay.
the short answer is absolutely not. Right. Or Samson, I'll let you go ahead.
Okay.
Oh no, you can go
Uh,
ahead. But I think it still goes back to the same thing about licensing, right? Because so some persons there's some license that just like I don't care about what people do in my project. You can take it and do whatever you want to do. You could take the logo, you can do whatever you want to do, right? And there's some license that still enable you to contribute to open source, but you never ever take take off the original I would say the first version of the code. It always have to be there. So again, that still goes back to the what type of license can I put in? There are licenses that make sure that you're always credited from the logo to whatever. But then there's cool licenses. I'm not sure about how things like logo affect things like most of the software licenses. But I know like Creative Commons is very accommodative when it comes to creatives like designers, technical writers, researchers. Like you often see people use Creative Commons, which is the CC. So if you go to websites, you see like CC something something. So that's like Creative Commons, and it's really really great if you are somebody that don't want to have any business to do with software projects. That is a great license that people always have to credit you. But if you're putting a software license, is a bit kind of a bit technical, and depending on how you want to put that license in. So let's say you're cloning Facebook, for example, and if Facebook happens to be an open source project, there might be a license that restricts you from revamping everything. But there's also a license that will enable you to take it and build, let's say, maybe I don't know, Clubhouse with the same code, and then you can change everything in there. Because mind you, companies build Chrome and other software projects, build things on top of open source without even having issues, because this software says, oh, it's okay, it's fine for you to take our code and then do whatever I want to do, but make sure that you always credit us and give gratitude and also donate if possible, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay, so what kind of project can you build on open source? And once you build that project, where do you put that project?
Um,
Right. So let me take the I'll take the first half of that question.
Okay.
Samson, you can talk
Yeah,
about
okay.
where you can publish the product. So essentially you can build anything. Anything can be open source. Any kind of product can be open source. Um, and so to give you an example, and usually open source softwares are alternatives to proprietary software that many people can't afford. So everyone knows
Mm,
Photoshop. Many people can't afford Photoshop. And then there's an open source software called GIMP, GIMP. And a lot of people who are into designing and software editing might know what GIMP is already, and you can download that and use it. So I would say that the first place you can publish where you can put your work once you've made it is if you have the funds, you can put together a quick website for the project and throw that up, um,
yeah.
and just share it in your network and let people know that, like, hey, this is my website, this is my product's website. You can go here and download the free version. And that's, I think from a business perspective, that's a really
Yeah.
good way to take if you are interested in monetizing later on and adding
Yeah.
features that you would then ask people to then pay for. um, I know that they're also libraries, and I want to say that, like, GitHub is one of the places you can publish your code
Yeah.
also when you're done. But Samson, can you confirm that? I want to make sure that I'm thinking of the right online
is it
online.
libraries?
Yeah, like once you're done with your open source project, aside from like putting it up on its own website, you can publish the actual code on GitHub, right?
Yeah. So I think all version of code can be hosted on GitHub, but then you decide GitHub is like the source of like your code, and you can decide what to do with it. So let's say, for example, you create a package for Python, you could post it on GitHub. That's for people to contribute, but you can take that, you can mirror it. There's a way to mirror stuff. So you can mirror the code into, let's say, the Python package manager per se. So somebody can do, let's say, Python install Django. Things like Django is a package, right, for Python, but Django is hosted on GitHub or GitLab, depending on where they are. I think it's GitHub actually, but then Django itself is then mirrored from GitHub to the Python package manager per se. So a user can now decide to use it, whatever ways they want to use it. But I agree with you.
Yeah.
Yes, the easiest way, I would say, the easiest way for you to share your projects, for you to release the project, is just to share. Building, hosting it publicly if you want people to see it. You can also use it on GitHub. You can make it private if you want, but I don't see any point of doing an open source project and making it private. That's
Yeah.
a bit of a cliche. So if you're hosting it on GitHub, you want to make it public, and then you could do whatever you want to do it from there. Like you could take it to Netlify, you can take it to God knows where you want to put it. Yeah.
Okay, so
And
so I have a
really,
question here.
to
Oh,
piggyback off
go on, I can.
real to piggyback off that, a really neat way to get more publicity and more visibility for your open source project is, as you're building, to
Yeah.
start talking about what you're building, and maybe start building out like a wait list, right? So that, because you might find that if this thing takes you 10 days or 14 days to build, right, depending on you might be able to get a list of 100 people who are ready to test it as soon as it's ready, right? And
Yeah.
share it with your own networks. And I think, especially if like you're just starting out your career and you want to push something out for people to use, that's an excellent way to get visibility, not only for yourself but also to teams that might want to bring you on board full time.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so there's a question. I'm sure I feel like you've answered this maybe say earlier, but maybe you just go over it again. So the person's asking how do they build a career leveraging open source? And I think Samson also mentioned it, but like how do they build a career leveraging open source? And maybe codes that they've written and the different openings at open source, job openings at open source companies.
Right. So we touched on it earlier, but I'll speak
Yeah.
a little bit more and talk about it from a slightly different angle, right? So if you've built an open
Mhm.
source project, um, let's say for instance you build a white labeled lending app, a white labeled mobile lending app, right? And you just built this thing. You built it because you were learning, you wanted to practice. You can go to a lender, any one lender in Nigeria, any microfinance bank, and you can say, hey, are you interested in using my software for free? Right? This thing is built out. It's a full lending app suite. Do you want to push this to your customers? I'll let you use it for free as a way to get your foot in the door, right? If they're
Mm.
interested and they start using it, what's naturally going to happen is they will want additional features. And then
Okay.
you can then charge your services as an independent software developer for them for those additional features. So that's one route to take. Another route that people take is, if you once you've created it, you can just put it online for people to use. Make a website, put it online, and then you can go like the donation route. So there will be people who use your like open source software a lot if it's really useful and good, and you can say to them, hey,
Mhm.
I have a day job, but if you'd like me to keep working on this open source software, it would really help if you made some donations or something like that, right? and
Yeah.
and there are other third services like Patreon that allow you to collect funds from people who support your work. So and then some things I said earlier are you can make free the open source version and then add a pack,
Yeah.
add a
Mhm.
feature for enterprise that is then paid for. So people
Mhm.
can download the software for free, but then to use this additional feature, they then have to pay a token to be able to download it. So those are some of the ways that you can
Yeah.
um, monetize open software.
Yeah. That's great. So, Samson. So one question, or so it's a one question, if I should say. So, the person asking how can they be an open source programmer and how they can contribute to open source projects.
Okay. So that's I think that's a pretty, I would say, straightforward question.
Yeah. Okay.
So again, just like what was mentioned before, open source is not a different universe where you need to learn something very specific in order for you to contribute or to start contributing to open source. I would say it depends on the angle that you want to be. So let's say you want to be an engineer, like your goal, your end goal is to be an engineer, like a software engineer writing code. Um, I think I've been talking about code a lot. Let's switch. Let's say you want to be a
Okay.
designer or product designer in
Mhm.
this case, and you want to be one of the best designers or one of the most visible designers on earth, right? And and you want to start now, like you're in somewhere in Lagos, I don't know, somewhere in Ikeja, you want to start now. And to do that,
Mhm.
it's pretty, I would say pretty straightforward. So one is you need to focus on what kind of tool do I want to start using. So you're looking at it from
Yeah.
the educational side of things, like how do I make myself better? So does the better part, like in this case, you could get a course online, or you could go to a design school, or you could do whatever you want
Yeah.
to do. You could even self-learn, like I did. So when you do that and you have a tool, let's say as a designer, you could say, okay, do I want to go to the Adobe Figma, Adobe SD route, or do I want to go to Figma route?
Yeah.
And then let's say you
Mhm.
choose Figma in this case. The next thing would be like, okay, so what kind of design do I want to start focusing on? And what is my should I say branding like? There's a whole lot of things that designers they know that I'm not a designer, but I work with a lot of designers. So
Mhm.
so when you start working on that, then the next thing would be like, how do I make my work visible? That's where open source come in. How do I grow with open source? The natural thing to do is to go to or start. You could ask on Twitter, right? You could start from Twitter. Twitter is a great place right now. I would say it's the most effective social media in my opinion,
Okay.
particularly for creators, right? So you could start from Twitter. You can say, hey, I have this skill. And it's always good when you outline things that you already know. Like I have this skill, I have this thing, I could offer this, but I want to grow in open source. There could be some people that could retweet. Let's say maybe I have a project that I'm looking for a designer. I could reach out to you and say, hey, by the way, you could come contribute, or you could go to the bigger boys route, like go to GitHub, register, and use the explore button to tell tasks that are relevant to you. Or this might be, again, this is not a sponsored stuff, but my work at OVO is kind of to eliminate that whole hustle of going to GitHub to start to look for things that are relevant to you. If you go to ovo.org, I think that's the website. I could share it later on the call. Um, if you go to ovio.org and you sign in through your GitHub, you put in the skill that are relevant to you. I think it works pretty well for coders, but I'm not sure about designers. If you want to come into as an
Yeah.
engineer, you can fill in your profile, and then Ovio can tailor things that are specific to you. So the next thing that you want to start focusing on is to complete tasks. You need to be respectful. You need to treat whatever you're doing in open source as if it's a day job, but you're not, getting paid, because again, you're not qualified to get paid. And if you're qualified to get paid, you also need to treat people with respect, because as a community, there's a language, difference, there's a cultural difference. You could even have to leave your comfort zone, like, in this case, like working with people from the LGBTQ plus community. You need to be, very, very respectful, because you're leaving your cultural space, you're leaving Lagos, you're leaving, the whole Nigerian mentality, and you're going to a place that is global, right? And in order for you to succeed, and in order for you to succeed in that space, or to succeed in this technical world, you just need to be open-minded, right? Or again, that could be a very controversial topic, but in my opinion, you need to be open-minded. But then you start working on tax, and obviously, like, I'll give an example. I started doing that same framework, working on it, and eventually, my the job that I would say the jobs that I've been having over the years, and even this one right now, I didn't do any sort of interview. We're like, hey, we saw what you did there, like, would you want to come work with us full time?
Interesting.
And I've also been approached by like companies like Google previously, talking about like, hey, this is the thing that we've seen you do with Oscar. Do you want to come and do this without professionally? And there's been a conversation around that. And these are things that open source benefits. Like, I can't remember the last time I did a job interview and got the job. It's always like, hey, I either go and shoot my shot at like what I did for this company I work with. Is like, hey, I know this, like, I think I could come and do this. It's like, oh, cool. Like, what's your rate like? I was like, okay, I like my rate is going to be like this per hour. I'm like, okay, cool. Like, you're hired.
Okay.
So there's a flex. I see open,
Okay.
I see a huge flex. So that's at least from my own point of view, that's how I see the career projection going.
Right. And to piggyback, Samson, thank you so much for sharing that. Right. And I think so a lot of times when we talk about open source, we're talking about we talk about code and we're talking about the technical side, but really open source is it's a mental model, it's a way of thinking, right? So it's the idea that in order to collaborate and to work with other people, sometimes to start you just have to provide value first without asking for anything. So we see it on Twitter, people the entire UI, the entire face and user experience for a particular app, like a popular app, right? And a lot of times, sometimes people they're able to get jobs off that. But the fact is that those sets of screenshots that the person shared, where they redesigned the app, that might have actually been 3 or 4 hours worth of work that they did for free, and did literally not knowing if anyone is even going to look at it. Right? We see the same thing in, you can apply the same open source mental model to marketing, right? If there's a brand you really like or an organization you'd like to work with, you can just create a copy for them and put it out and tag them, right? Someone eventually will see it, and if they're a large enough organization that has resources, right? Even if they don't, they'll likely reach out to you and contact you. So I think it's really like for people who are interested in getting in building a career in tech, I really want to encourage everyone to jump into the mental model. How do I add value first, right? Before I ask for value back. And I think if you go about it that way, you'll be really successful.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah, definitely support that. Okay, so I know you guys were a bit, you don't want to answer questions on licensing, but we have a few questions about licensing. So someone is asking that what is the best open source if Okay, so someone's asking what is the best open source license to use if the person wants to release their software? What's the best open source license to use to release their software?
Uh, so there's no best open source license. There's no best open source license. I would say a license should represent you, your ultimate goal, and what you intend to do. And that's why there are licenses, right? In plural, there are licenses. There's a lot of licenses that you. Okay, it seems like there's a lot of background noise.
For me, can you just
Oh,
mute
sorry
everyone?
about that.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So as I was saying, right? So one of the things that I don't like talking about license is the fact that, in my opinion, there's no best license, right? A license should represent your dream, your goal, your mission of why you even eventually start creating that idea from the first start. So if your first idea is to create something that you want people to easily contribute to and give back, there are licenses that clearly and purely written to help you to make sure it remains that way. For example, I know the easiest one is Creative Commons, most likely for non-code project. I'm not sure how Creative Commons protects code-based projects, but I know things like MIT is pretty neutral. A whole lot of people decide to go with MIT, but if you're going for like purely open-minded community and you want to be the community out of it, I think JPL version 3 is great because that's what something that we use at Sugar Labs, because Sugar Labs is a project that creates things around education and we create systems and solutions so anybody can come anywhere in the rest of the world to pick it up and use it for free. So we decided like, hey, this is something I want to do and this is a license for us, right? So in my opinion, based on my experience, the best license is based on what you want to do that could tailor your needs, so that's it for me.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Samson, so when Samson says it depends on what you want to do, what he's talking
Yeah.
about is there are different, when you create a software and you say you want it to be open source, there are different things you're telling people they can and cannot do, right? And so
Mm.
so for example, one of the first things you want to decide is, do I want other people to be allowed to distribute my distribute my software without me knowing, right? So essentially you need
Mm.
to decide what you want the distribution to be, right? You can
Yeah.
either say yes, I don't mind, people can reproduce my software and give it out. So for example, an IT teacher can take my software and make copies of it and put it on a CD and give it to the 30 students in his class.
Oh, okay.
That's an example of distribution, right? If you're okay with that, then that's fine. Then if you're not, then okay, you're not okay with that. Then the second,
Yeah.
another you want to think about is you want to decide like, how do I want closed communities to be able to use the software, right? So for
Mm.
example, can Evolve Credit take my software and start using it inside their organization and make money from it,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Without my
Okay.
involvement, right? Without paying me royalties. You want to decide that. I think it's called I think it's called private use. You want to decide, are people allowed to modify the software, right? So can the IT teacher, for example, take my software and tweak it to teach his students without me knowing? So why Samson was like that, it's difficult for him to give a recommendation on a specific kind of
Yeah.
license to people is that different licenses have different combinations of what they allow people to do and what they don't allow people to do. And so knowing which license is best for you would depend on you having decided first how you want third parties to be able to use the software you're creating. And then it would be as easy as doing a Google search to find the appropriate license to tag, right? And in most
Mm.
cases, most people won't even really know what the license means. What they would
Yeah.
understand are what those different, like, what are the distribution rights? What are the modification rights? What are the private use rights?
Mm-hmm.
What are the patent rights, if any? That's what they would understand. And so I think it's more important for you to understand the, I guess, the what goes into a license than what the specific title of
Yeah.
any one license is, if that makes sense.
All right. Okay. So we're going to take two more questions and we'll call it a wrap. So the second to the last question is okay, Samson, can you tell us some of the top open source programmers in Africa and the world? So programmers for people to sort of follow, I guess.
Open source programs
Programmers.
or programmers. Oh, that will be hard though.
Number one,
Well,
Samson.
no, follow somebody else. Yeah. So yeah. So I think it depends on like normally I always tell people if you're trying to follow anybody or you're trying to like you want to see somebody as a potential I don't like using the word idol, like somebody that you just want to follow his or her footstep, right? I
Yeah.
would say you should kind of identify what you want to do in order for you
Mhm.
to be influenced in the right way. Because myself, I could use myself for example. I know my tweet is not very like on Twitter, like I'm not very specific about like what I do because I always want to make sure that I have as much generic audience as possible. But as on persons like I could on top of my head I could say Edith Young, for example. Edith Young, I suppose
Mhm.
she works for Hashnode. Because of her job and because of what she does, she's very maybe she does other things, but she's very specific about writing and how you could
Mhm.
improve your skill in writing. So if you're somebody that is looking forward to become a better writer in this case, you could go follow her and follow people like her to see the tip and the tips and tricks to become a better technical writer or even to
Yeah.
even get some technical jobs. Then,
Mhm.
like myself, if you want to come and see overview of open source and maybe some ups and downs, you can follow me on Twitter if you're interested. But then when it comes to using the word top, I don't like, in my opinion, I don't see things like top. Like I could address companies as top because of the money they have, but because of the
Yeah.
individuals and the fact that it's a community, I don't like using the word. It's not a competition. So uh, there might be an experience level. Like I've been doing open source for the last 8 to 9 years, but that does not
Mhm.
automatically make me one of the top open source folks. I think at the end of the day, it's just the value that that person creates and the type
Yeah.
of and the openness of that person can make that person a great community person. So in my opinion, trying to again, just like how you choose a license, try to figure out like what you want to do, and if you're very specific about who you follow, then go based on your preference, right? And Twitter happens to be that place that you can choose and go and do supermarkets or browse around. But on top of my head, Idiom Cool, Ada, Prosperity Manuel, Code Beast, Bolaji, Ayodeji. There's a lot of people that I can't even count on my head, including my friends, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, so I think that's the easiest way then. Yeah.
Okay, so last question. So say trying to get started learning like software languages and get started contributing on open source. So how does someone join an open source project? Like maybe like a step by step or short. Just tell me how to do it. Yeah.
Okay, so I think I've already explained this before. Again, open source is not a different universe. Open source technically bettered technology because literally everything we're using this point at some point somebody created it for free. Like imagine the world without Python. Google may not be existing because Google idea came from the search, and search happens to be a research project that two folks at Stanford created with Python. So there's a whole lot of dependencies that relates back to open source when it comes to the actual technology world, right? So what I would say is I use this terminology because this is something that I learned while working with some scientists at MIT. There's this thing that MIT boldly pride around called learning while doing. So if you're a student at MIT, there's this principle that nobody is knowledgeable. Like you always learn while you're working on things. So let's say you're in the hello world phase in Python, like you're learning Python programming language, and the moment you learn that, let's say you learn variable, right? Instead of you to just keep learning variable,
Mhm.
then jump on if conditional statement and then switch to looping and all those sections of Python, you could start taking those things that you've learned and start experimenting on building an actual project for yourself. And eventually, if you start, having that bunch of experience, you could now start looking for smaller piece of tasks that could improve, let's say, a better looping system or a better conditional system. Start from small and then start approaching things. But the
Yeah.
core principle that you want to keep in your head growing up in tech, irrespective of any field you
Yeah.
are, is to make sure that there's no perfect learner. Even the
Mm-hmm.
university can't even make you a perfect learner. You always make sure that you learn and then you do things and you go back again and you learn. Even if you're teaching somebody, like I've been in a position where I teach people coding previously, I sometimes learn some new ways or some new system. Like, oh, I didn't thought about this. Like, thank you for sharing that. Like, be always
Yeah.
open to learn. And that's, in my opinion, that's the way you grow to whatever you want to see yourself, even if it's going to, like to Mars in this case.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're going to round up now, but I'd like to ask Akan and you, Samson, your last words to say people in the ecosystem, people coming into open source, and people that want to build a tech company with a product. So what are your advice? What is your advice to any person
Sure.
coming?
I'd say one thing. So I'd say trust and collaboration trumps competition and savagery every time, right? So
Okay.
I think in context of our local ecosystem that we're trying to build here, what we need is more open source behavior, more open source mentality, more people who are extremely talented coming together and saying, let's work together to create value together on projects that we're interested in and that we care about. And then if, yes, I think the opportunity to make money
Yeah.
and then compete in a positive way will present itself. But I think that at the moment the ecosystem is still so small that really
Yeah.
we should be working together to make it massive, so that there
Mm-hmm.
can actually we actually have a big enough pool to compete with, and we're not big fishes in small ponds. We want to be massive fishes in or massive fish in massive ponds. So that's what I'd say. And Samson, you can wrap up for
I
everyone. I'll give
I
you the
I
floor.
I,
Yeah.
he took everything out of my mouth already. So like I totally agree. I think that should be the priority. Collaboration is something that is it's something that even if you even become an expert and you're in a position to lead, collaboration just happens to make a whole lot of things easier. And in order for you to collaborate, the ability for you to have an open mind is a skill. Like that's why I always tell people your soft skill is as important as your technical skills. So you could be one of the best engineer in the world. Like even the creator of Linux at some point was having some problems with his emotional intelligence, and they, because of
Mm.
how things were, they told him to step down, and he did for like a couple months, and he even went back to so learn some bunch of empathy. So at the end of the day, no matter what you're doing, you want to make sure that your soft skill is as important as your technical skill. And on the technical level, again, learning while doing is a very great concept. Don't always take 665 courses and then have that bunch of certificates to say, hey, I'm satisfied by Google, Microsoft, Amazon. I don't even want, like, just like, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
What matters is the value that you give back. So that's basically
Yeah.
it from my end. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think I've learned a few things, and I hope everybody else has. Thank you so much, Samson and Akan, for joining. And thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Please follow our social media, Aggressive Capital, obviously, and Aggressive for Good, and subscribe for the newsletters. Aggressive for Good always shares gems. Follow Evolve Credit, follow Akan, follow Samson on Twitter, and have a great day. And I hope you learned so much. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Thank you. Bye, Akan and Samson. Bye, everyone.